Okay, here we go. Good evening, everyone. It is Monday, October 21st at 5:30 p.m. Welcome to the Learning and Teaching Committee meeting. I will officially call this meeting to order at 5:30. Mr. Harvey says we do not have any citizens' comments, so we will move right on to item 2A, reports to the board.
Mr. Kushit, I'll kick this one off and then I'll hand it over to Dr. Igo. We're going to try something a little new at our L&T committee. This was a joint idea by board members about how to ensure that we're providing updates along the way. We'll continue doing the good work under discussion, whatever ends up there. But the board was feeling like there's been too many weeks or months gone by without us touching base on certain topics. So the board was looking for something similar to the superintendent update, where I'll give my updates to the board. Christine will be giving updates on different aspects that are happening within learning and teaching. It's really an FYI more than anything else, touch base, but it's a process we're going to try to see if it closes that loop on that connective tissue from discussions that happened weeks or months ago, and trying to make sure that we're always connecting those dots. That's the idea behind it. So we'll start it tonight, see how it goes. With that, Dr. Igo, your first Chief Academic Officer update.
But I turned the mic on. Okay. So as we start tonight, really wanted to provide two updates to you, kind of status on projects that we're working on in the learning and teaching. One really has to do with our high quality multilingual program. And then the second one really has to focuses in on our guaranteed and viable curriculum, specifically high school math. Just kind of putting each of those things into context of all of the work that we're doing within learning and teaching. And it really is the work that we're going to talk about tonight really does fall within that instructional coherence, specifically the guaranteed and viable curriculum, and then those equitable systems of support. So those are the updates that we're working through. Let's kind of start with multilingual services. So first, just wanted to kind of ground us in who do we serve. And so this chart really does provide you just some general feedback in regards to English language services for the district. And then I focused in on elementary because we're going to be talking a little bit about dual language and the idea that we've got about 10% of our student population is eligible. Of that 10%, 58% speak Spanish and 42% speak another language. At the elementary, it's about 51% of that 10%. 64% speak Spanish, 35 of those Spanish are served within dual language. So just kind of like gives us kind of a place to start. Before I started to really dig in to like, what is it that we're doing? I wanted to just lay some groundwork as it relates to what are the requirements that we have to do through ISB and how do they set things up for us in the way that we provide services. And I think first and foremost, the most important thing is for us to really reflect on is what is the purpose of those multilingual services. And the purpose of those services is to develop English language proficiency in students so that they are able to access grade level content. And so that is really what the law is about. That is what the statute is about. And that is really how ISB has approached that. And then when we talk about how do we provide those services, we really think about how we provide those services in two separate groups or two separate programs. And one is a transitional bilingual and one's a transitional program of instruction. And really the difference between those two has to do with the number of students that you service in your building. So if you have more than 20 students, we do what's called TBE. If you have less, then we are then able to do less than 20. The difference between TBE and TPI really has to do with native language instruction. So under TBE, we are required under the law to provide instruction in the native language. TPI, it can be available, but it is no longer required. What's required regardless of TBE or TPI is really the idea that you must provide explicit instruction in English language development, and you must provide instruction in history and culture of that native language. So those two things are required regardless. And then we go down one more level to, is it TBE or TPI? Now we start to talk about what does that native language instruction look like? Is it required? Is it not required? And I'm gonna take it, well, one step. And take it one more step further to just kind of complicate things. One further step is in that TBE section. You'll see over there, it's kind of broken down into full-time and part-time services. Full-time services are required for students who score an access score below 3.5. Part-time is anybody higher than that. The difference between full-time and part-time services is how we provide native instruction. If a student is eligible for full-time services, we must provide instruction in their native language in all content areas. It does not have to be minute for minute, but if we provide ELA literacy instruction every day, then we also need to provide some support in the native language in the same way. But the support could be 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever that looks like, right? Because again, we're leveraging the student's native language for the purposes of building their English language skills. We aren't building by literacy, which is there's a difference, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we kind of walk through. So full-time, we have to provide it. Doesn't have to be minute by minute. Part-time services, we as a instructional team make the decision about what and when and where to provide that native instruction. We just know we need to provide it. Mr. Lentz.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate that explanation, Christine. For TBE,
Yep.
is there a census date or some date, potentially the start of the school year? So if we hit a threshold midway through where we now have to have a, particular dialect of some language,
Yep,
like, could we hit that at any point in time
Yes,
during
we
the
could.
year and cross the threshold?
we absolutely could.
Okay, and then next question on this, that is all based on that. Like every single newcomer would be going through and doing
Yeah.
the testing
Yeah,
then
they take.
based on their survey,
Correct.
correct?
So, right, if we think all the way, right, they say in their home language, they fill out the home language form and it indicates they speak a second language in the
Spoken
home.
at home,
We then do it's not the full access test, we do an access screener, but it's the equivalent.
okay. Got it. Okay, so at any point during the year, we could cross the threshold, and right now, how many languages, just for the public, how many languages do we have TBE on? I know we have one that we
Oh.
can't find an instructor.
Yeah, we have two, so
We have two.
Spanish and Gujarati.
Okay.
Yeah, and we are not close on any of the others.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. So kind of working from the requirements, right? We then go into, so what does that mean for service delivery models? Because that's really the project that we're kind of working through. And so we can provide full-time, you'll see full-time and part-time TBE look very similar. We can provide that full-time TBE through dual language. We can provide it through a self-contained classroom or a course, or we can provide it through collaborative, what we call collaborative model, which you may have heard as a resource model, where we might push in and provide services, or we might pull out and provide services, or we might do some consulting. Again, that TPI looks very similar. It could be self-contained courses. At the high school or the middle school, you're more likely to see a self-contained course like EL1, EL2. But generally, we try to provide that TPI through that collaborative model because students are mostly in the gen ed classroom, right? So we're trying to provide each of those things. So we can take those things and kind of work through each of those. The difference really being, we're going to talk through like each district then gets the opportunity to decide how do they want to provide that service delivery model and what is their end goal.
So along those lines.
Yeah.
If the district determines, here's the best way that we can serve these students and our teachers and everything
Mhm.
else, we set that as what our service is, and then does that get reviewed by the regional board of education? Does that, like, how does this process work for us?
So we would really set that up and put that in motion. Now, we are monitored
Right.
periodically, so then the ROE comes in and
For
monitors to make
compliance
sure we've done all
perspective,
the
right.
things we're supposed to do. The state sometimes comes in and they leave us with a list of, here's what you've got in place, here's what you don't, here's what you need I think they call it an action plan or something to
So
fix.
remediation.
Remediate, yeah.
Right, okay. All right, but it's up to us as a district to make those determinations.
It is up to us to make those determinations.
And when we go and do that, when we're looking at the different resources, right? If it's self-contained, if we, if we say, hey, listen, like it's gonna be a pullout, you're gonna sit in front of the computer module and we have a language instruction, right? Because it's it's a different language. That we of course, do we have a catalog of languages that come with our texts?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So for our TPI services, so
Right.
like, Polish, Ukrainian are kind of our second two languages. We wouldn't necessarily provide that information in that language. We would use our EL teachers or our multilingual teachers to utilize their instructional knowledge and understanding around
Okay.
how do I use visuals, all of those things to build those skills in kids. So it looks different than when you're doing a TPE model.
Right, so staff is it's absolutely crucial in any of these models, right?
Absolutely.
Staff is absolutely essential to go through and again, know the native language,
Yep.
right? To be able to translate from an instruction. Again, just kind of going back to my question on the resources for text, right? We've just gone through, approving curriculum and everything else. Do the textbook companies offer us like additional language packs or anything else?
Not traditionally, you
Okay.
might be able to find something in Spanish.
Right.
Just because it's a dominant, but once you step outside of that. But I think it's really important to remember the goal or the purpose depending on, right? Like, so in our dual language program, we have a separate resource that provides Spanish literacy instruction because our goal is biliteracy.
Right.
Outside of that, what we're trying to do is leverage their home language to learn English. So we don't necessarily provide a ton of materials in that language, but we do have technology that allows us to take a picture of something and translate it while we're in for that student so that they are able to participate in a worksheet or whatever, if that's helpful.
Got it. And so with that in mind, do we have, as you guys are looking through it, and this is something that I've heard from somebody in the community who moved here from Colorado, which had a very high level of refugees, multiple languages. Looking at intensive English instruction potentially, I know Mr. McNally has mentioned like a newcomer academy or something like that, getting them up to proficient in grade level, in their home language instruction or whatever, to then put them back into the classroom so they're proficient. Is that something that you guys are also looking at from a proficiency? And
I think, we haven't started yet because
Okay.
you'll hear as I walk through the presentation tonight
I don't want to step us ahead. So
that we've prioritized the 25-26 school year because that's upon us. And then we'll move into the 26-27 school year.
Could you talk just real briefly about any funding that comes from the federal government or I don't know if the state does, with TPI and TBE?
Yeah, so we do have what Title III grant, which is a federal grant, and we call a flow-through grant. So the grant goes to the state and the state disperses it, takes how many kids in the state and it disperses it. But it's not a significant amount of money. I want to be clear about that. And then in previous times, the state used to provide specific funding as it related for EL students. However, with the new model, that all rolled into, right? Like that was how they kept us the same. I can't think of what that's called. The funding model, like the evidence-based funding. Yeah, that was it. When they rolled that in, it's no longer about how many EL kids you have. It's about where you were previous to them starting that program.
Dr. Igo, before we move forward, could you, just for folks who might be listening at home, can you clarify push in, pull out?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So in a collaborative model, what we're really talking about is the student is in the general education classroom and we're going to work side by side with that gen ed teacher. And so part of that is providing consulting, part of that's providing coaching to that gen ed teacher so that they are able to create access. But if we're going to push in, an EL teacher may push in and provide those services within the classroom based on the content that is happening. That can be done through co-teaching. It could also be done through, we're doing small groups and we're breaking into flexible groups and I'm just going to take this group while that teacher takes that group. It can be done through parallel teaching, or it could be done through I'm taking students from 3 or 4 different classes and we're going to come together and we're going to pull out of the classroom so that I can provide some instruction. Sure.
And just because we use the word access a lot, could you just briefly talk quickly about what the access test is? Because that is different than what other students are taking.
Sure. So the access assessment is given to all of our students who qualify for services. And in that, it looks at speaking, listening, writing, and reading. And so there's scores that they need to have all the way across. And what that provides us with is, here's what students are able to do independently. So this is our next goal, right? We call them WIDA standards. And here's where kids are focused. So this is what they can do. And this is what I'm pushing towards in the next step of the learning progression. So the access score allows us to do that. It also provides, that is what they use to determine when a student exits. So a student needs to score 4.8 in order to exit our programming.
Dr. Igo, that test is a state defined and state mandated test.
Yes, it is.
So when the students take that test, it's not a D303 test.
It is a state
designed
test,
Thank you.
correct. Very similar to the IAR. So just kind of putting all those things in place, again, I'm going to push us back a little bit to our vision and our goals. So we have high expectations for all of our students. We have high levels of learning. We've identified our multilingual learners, particularly those who speak Spanish, as having an achievement gap. And so we have set those college and career benchmarks that we've set. We've put some goals around multilingual students, and it is to mirror our non-ML students, right? We want those scores to look exactly the same. And then a secondary really is about that we're exiting our EL services within 5 years of entering school. So we know it takes between 5 and 7 years. The ISB really starts to say at 5 years, you should start to see an exit. After 7, we become what's called a long-term EL. So with that, knowing that that was it, last year, we really sat down and we did an improvement strategy. And we said, so what is it that we need to do if we, as Janelle Keating likes to say, if we're really serious about this, what are we going to do? And how are we going to act on that? And so we spent some time really investigating it, understanding what are those evidence-based practices, how do they play in? And as we did, we really came up with that. The improvement strategy was around, you have to set common rigorous standards for all kids, then differentiate our instruction and our resources to ensure that students learn them. And then we identified these 5 levers kind of along the way. You might remember, we talked about this like last January in terms of those effective leaders having that core instruction. And we really focused in on those high quality programs for our multilingual learners. And I think we then use these evidence-based practices to guide our decisions. So we then said, what are the most high quality programming we have for our multilingual students? We also looked at our dual language programming and just said, what should that look like? What are the practices we should have in place? And that's how we built those evidence-based strategies to kind of work through. These ones really focus on high quality programming. And I think the ones that are most important, or one I really want to pull out, is the idea that there needs to be structured cooperative learning to provide ample discourse between students whose home language is Spanish and whose home language is English. And so that was a really big push for us around, we wanted to move away from one way into two way, because the need and the importance of learning alongside a non-multilingual student is important, right? Like that is how that common discourse occurs, and that's how that modeling happens. And in a two-way program, we're modeling for both sides, right? English and Spanish. Sometimes the Spanish student is supporting the English, depending on what language that we're talking in. So that was kind of the program that we put in place, or we recommended kind of moving forward. Within that, I'm going to kind of bring us a little bit along on a journey of how we got where we are today. Was that we had some concerns, or the board had concerns as they related to a new development. And based upon that, we had to pause construction. When we paused that construction, we knew that that meant that there was no matter what happened with that development, there wasn't a way for us to then get the addition that was to happen at Richmond. And that addition really came through that boundary process where we really talked about, we no longer wanted mobiles. And I also want to be clear, the mobile is at the end of its life, right? Right? Like in order to continue with the mobile, we'd have to replace the mobile, which is millions of dollars, right? So the board made that decision to add on to Richmond in order to help support this program. So when we didn't have that option anymore, we knew that no matter what, we were going to have to come back to the table and create a plan for 25, 26. Honestly, at that moment in time, we didn't know if it was forever or if it was just that moment in time, right? Now, obviously, things have changed. We're still in a spot where we need a plan for 25, 26 because we don't have enough classrooms to continue with that one-way dual language. With that, I feel like we had two problems that were emerging simultaneously. So we had this construction pause that came about, which required us to stop and think about how are we going to provide services in 25, 26. At the same point, we're seeing our changing enrollment in our students and our needs. And within that work that we did last year, we had identified newcomers as a new piece, and that we knew that that was hanging out there and that we needed a plan to see the incredible kind of uptick at the same time. It really came that as we sat down, we had two problems emerging, not necessarily connected, that started to overlap. And so we were going to bring a committee together to really think about that dual language and what are we going to do for next school year? Well, we figured out what happened next. I thought that what would made the most sense was that we stopped as a district because we had these things that were happening simultaneously and two problems that needed to be solved, that we really stopped to really think about what are the things that we need to have in place to meet the needs of our multilingual students across the district, but within the district capacity regarding what are the human resources, our facilities, our spaces, and our financial constraints. So it's not that one or the other isn't, it's we were trying to solve both those problems at the same time. And it felt like the most important thing to do and to make sure that we were good stewards of our resources is that we started to think about how that problem kind of came together. And so with that, we really then put together that idea of that roadmap for our committee. And that committee really has two sets of tasks. One is to recommend a program for next school year. The next is to look at 26, 27 and beyond. And to really be able to recommend, we've added an addition and here's our recommendation. We didn't add an addition, here's our recommendation, because we want to make sure that we've got all of those pieces in place so that we can then make the next appropriate step. So you can see that we've done 2 meetings already. We're trying to move really quickly. We're using a very similar process to we use as we do when we do CAI in terms of how do we bring people together. I do want to be very transparent, and a lot of the work we do in CAI is that we do the research together. And because of the time constraint, we're leaning into the research we did last year to help guide the work that we're doing. So we are using those evidence-based practices to guide our work. We've also put these parameters in place for us as well, is that it needs to align with our strategic plan. And that means that it needs to have programs where there's a collaborative partner, because we've leaned so heavily into PLCs that we need to make sure everyone has access to those grade level standards, that there's flexibility within the grouping throughout elementary school, that we don't pigeonhole kids into one place, and that it aligns with those practices of inclusive practice. We also talked about it had to meet the equitable spaces. So we did all that work this year to do minimum space standards and make sure art on a cart and music on a cart, all those things. So we didn't want to put us in a spot where we were impacting that, as well as hitting the financial parameters. And that we had to work from the understanding that their mobile would not be here next year. We also talked about we don't have the time, like we're not fixing boundaries, we can't reboundary in order to help. So those were kind of the places that we are working from. Models.
Dr. Igo, 1 second, just
Yeah.
before you continue. So since we have a couple of month process here for the roadmap for the work, and I think in the spirit of last board meeting and actually the initial discussion we had for your update, do you think we'll have a couple of opportunities to weigh in? I mean, naturally, our committee will be meeting with you, a couple of times throughout that.
Yeah.
I recognize that the recommendation comes to the board on December 16th. Do you think we'll have kind of halfway points or some spots where we might be
So
able to
those
chime
cute
in?
little red circles there that I didn't really talk about, and I apologize, are feedback loops. And I apologize. So thank you for bringing that back to me. And so we had actually hoped to have something to go out for feedback following our meeting on Friday. And honestly, we just aren't ready. We were working through it.
but we're hoping to be in a spot, and we will start with our dual language teachers, make sure that they get, because we're focusing on 25, 26, making sure that we're in a good spot for that. Then we will move it to all. So we eventually hope to bring it to parents. We were talking about either using feedback or maybe a survey with families, maybe towards the end when we've got a really revised kind of plan in place, but there's absolute opportunity for feedback.
You took the next question right out of my mouth. I was going to say, will there be an opportunity for the public to
Yeah.
weigh in? So thank you for that.
So some of the work that we've done in our committee meeting is that we first started with what are those evidence-based practices? And we use those evidence-based practices to look at each of the different possible models or service delivery models that we have available to us. And you can see on there, we really ruled out one-way dual language and self-contained TBE. And the reason we ruled those out really had to do with the not being able to work and learn alongside non-monolingual peers. And so we've left on the table two-way dual language and collaborative TBE. And again, in full transparency, that we are not in a position to run two-way dual language next year because of our space constraints. But we are in a position to take that and have that conversation around collaborative TBE. So we are really working through, there's a lot of different ways in which we can offer that collaborative TBE model. So we are working through what does that look like, sound like, feel like, while also thinking really strategically about how do we take care of kids and families, right? Like we want to be really strategic and thoughtful about, we've had a lot of change, right? And there's been a lot of change for kids, and there's been a lot of change for families, and been a lot of change for teachers. So like, we obviously make the best decisions, but we also can't forget that those things are also happening at the same time. So really kind of thinking through what might that look like.
Before you go on, I have a couple of different questions for you that are in some ways related. The first is when we talk about things like evidence-based practices, when we come back and get to these feedback loops, what measures of positive student outcomes will you use or have you used to come up with the green and red table that you have? And so when you bring back the alternatives to the board, how will you set expectations for any of the programs that you bring back to the board's impact on student outcomes? So while we can see, these are positive attributes of alternative programs, what will you bring back?
Yeah, so I would fall back to what the outcomes are the outcomes, right? Like these are the things, if we do all these things, what we should see is that kids start to exit the program in 5 years. We should see ELA and math scores going up. Those are the kinds of things we should see. Progress towards proficiency on the access, which is a way we measure how kids are growing, that those scores or that continues to grow, because by doing all of these things, the research says that's what we get to.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for that. The other question that I would ask is, you have some things in red cells here on slide 17 and some, highlighted in green that look good. And one of the things that's absent is the resource consumption of any of these cells. And so, for example, just take a red cell like one-way dual language and whatever the limitations that are represented by that one-way cell. You said some of these have been ruled out. And so one of the questions that I would pose is, how on earth can we rule them out if we have yet to see what the resource consumption implications are versus the potential student outcomes? And so is there some way that you've just said, hey, these are just absolutely provide no benefits to students, therefore we shouldn't do them? And maybe that's so, but I just don't see what litmus test you've used to rule them out.
Sure. So we really look to see, could we provide that evidence-based strategy in that model? And the thinking was that if we can't even provide the evidence-based strategy, we shouldn't there's not a reason for us to continue to walk down that pathway to what does that mean for resources? What does that mean for, again, trying to work within the constraints of our time. And that particular one that I highlighted in yellow there, that they need that language model is so powerful that if we can't provide that in a model, that was what made us roll it out.
Okay, that's understandable. I guess the other question would be,
I mean, I can do the other way if you'd like.
what I'm trying to get to is the evidence. And what's the evidence? And so you have a group of folks who may have done a literature review or looked at some set of evidence. We have yet to see what that evidence is. And I know you'll bring it to us through those feedback loops that you have described. I would encourage you to bring back not only whatever the latest research looks like, but whatever programs are in play in our aspirational districts or in other districts that are dealing with this, to say the pragmatic evidence of school districts like ours suggests something, even if that is something other than what is reflected in what I will call the latest academic evidence. To me, that would be of high value.
Absolutely. And we have done some of that work. And so I can bring that back. We definitely have.
So just to tag along, because my common question was that what the research has said for, I would assume, quite a while, is that for students who are not native English speakers or students of any language, they will learn better. I'm using really icky words. I know there's better words. If they are learning alongside students who have that native language. That's why dual two-way. Am I right? Am I saying
Not
it
that
actually?
they are working alongside strong English models.
Right. So
Yes.
they see and hear. We had a period of time where we would put students who spoke one language isolated from English speakers. And what you're saying that these red boxes are that they don't provide those strong English model experiences for students who are not native English speakers.
Correct. So those are evidence-based practices. So when we did the research or the literature review, these were the practices that came up as the ones where people are starting to close gaps for students. These were the things that were in place and were recommended for moving forward.
I think it's very critical that we as a board understand that. And that we also understand, you said it earlier, that we are leveraging their language knowledge to also build towards English. So we're not necessarily, I'm repeating what you said, but we're not necessarily aiming for biliteracy. We are aiming for strong success in English. Am I saying that?
With a TBE model, that
Right,
is the end
TBE.
goal, and that is our requirement under the law. Now, I want to be like, gets a little messy. So I just again, for clarity's sake, in a dual language program, the goal is biliteracy, right? And that is the end game, is biliteracy. And there is absolute value. You've heard me say that at the table. There is value in biliteracy. And we do know that research says that when we leverage that language, right, that's what helps kids learn faster and better.
And that dual language two-way, just to be really clear, was also to have our native English speakers be
Correct.
biliterate. So it
Yes.
was, it's that
It's biliteracy
we're
across the
getting a
board.
cohort of kids. That's I think the goal the board initially wanted was how do we build biliteracy in English and Spanish native speakers?
100%.
Along those lines, and I think that's a great clarification, Ms. McCabe. In the, if we don't go the two-way, right? Are there benefits for native English speakers in that class? I know there's definitely
Absolutely.
benefits for non-native English speakers, right? Because they're learning from the instruction, but can you detail what the benefits? Because again, there's not just one group of
Yep.
folks in the classroom.
Absolutely. So one of the nice things that we do know, and the research does support, is when we integrate students and we talk about some of the practices that we use with our multilingual learners. There's one particular is called SIOP, which is a language framework that we use, that when we implement that in a classroom, all kids do better. So for instance, if you were to implement that, there's research that shows when you implement that in an AP classroom, more students are in 4s and 5s, more students meet that criteria. So every student benefits from having some of that language framework in place.
Christine, what is it called?
It's called SIOP.
This
SIOP.
It's called SIOP.
It stands for something and I
Okay.
can't remember it.
Yep,
Okay,
but I will
I
look
wanted
it
to
up.
make sure I heard you correctly on that.
Yeah, it's
SYOP.
I think, yeah, I think. So as I look at this, the collaborative TBE checks all the boxes that we're
Mhm.
hoping to check, as does two-way dual language. And to kind of address one of the things that Mr. Lentz said, I have two sons who got their seal of biliteracy. They did not have the two-way dual language. It was probably a model closer to the TBE. But at that school anyway, but if we do the collaborative TBE, that's something that can be implemented kind of across the board more readily than the dual language.
Yeah, I mean.
In the current iteration anyway.
Yep, I don't want to like necessarily, but some of the benefits to that are that it's one program that we can run across the district, which allows us to bring our resources together to build versus trying to run two programs.
Right.
It's always hard when you start to split your resources.
Yeah, well, and that's really kind of what I was getting is because Mr. Lackner had asked the question about resource allocation. And I think that's something that at least points in that direction. And I think also uniformity across the board throughout the district. I think that's beneficial, even if it's not a resource allocation issue, all other things being equal. I think having that uniformity across the board makes it a more efficient education.
And again, I don't want to jump to conclusions or make decisions because that really, and I don't want to take away from, we should vet both of those things next to all of the things that we need to do and then make decisions, right? And all of the students we need to support.
I mean, I would second that though, Mr. McNally, that if something is, very beneficial across the district and, obviously notwithstanding the challenges to resources and allocation of talent, but if this is something that, like the example you used for your two sons, if this is something that we could offer across the district and it is, instrumental to student success, then we would be wise to be looking at that even throughout the vetting process.
To be clear, my sons were not Spanish speakers. I'm just saying they got the seal of biliteracy and they were able to do so in the school where they were at, probably at a program closer to that.
But our collaborative TBE model would not necessarily support kids in meeting that seal of biliteracy.
Right.
Because they need to show that they're proficient in English and in another language, and we aren't building to biliteracy. Two different goals. And we can still get kids to the seal of biliteracy through our world language pathway.
Right.
Like, I don't want to say we're shutting that door. It can be done. It would just be done differently.
Yeah, there's a different path and along those lines, right? The one thing that you're both kind of talking about, right, is or at least that I'm recalling from the conversations that we had when we were originally going through this is the concerns around our the number of sections within a building that we're doing this and everything else and the constraints that we thought at the time were placed on it. So just I'm going to be very curious as the group comes back with that, certainly with challenges and everything else, what are the things that would be helpful in mitigating some of those challenges that we've previously identified, right?
Yeah.
How do we mitigate them? What are some of the paths that we can take? And what are the things that you need from us, right? Either to clarify as far as, kind of like, hey guys, here's the new options. It's going to require either, a spend here, or it's going to require us to rethink about, how we're looking at this. So that's something that as you go into this process, and I really appreciate the timeline, Christine, that I'm gonna be very curious about that because again, I remember those conversations. I think that we had really great conversations about some of those things. And I think there were a lot of really great points about, okay, how are we, offering this at multiple schools? What does that mean? We know that if we do this, there's a certain number of classrooms that get taken up.
Correct. I mean, I just want to be clear that the two-way dual language is absolutely dependent upon the addition.
So I just to tag along on that and to make sure that we don't forget that it was the goal of this board to do dual language two-way. And I think we have to be as clear and strong about what it brings to our students as we will with the collaborative. I have talked to people who are very disappointed that the dual language is not coming next year. And so I think it's really important that we don't just forget that it is also a priority that we had at one point. Now, I'm not going to argue now whether or not, we can't do it or we can do it, but we have let some people down.
Absolutely.
And there are board members who aren't here right now who did strongly believe that this was the direction we should go. So I appreciate that you're going to bring us both.
Absolutely. And again, I don't want anyone to walk away that it's not that we don't think, or I don't think that two-way there is a gold standard. And I argued that at this table and I believe in that at this table. I just also feel like I need to be cautious with our resources and make sure I can do all the things I need to do within the restraints of our resources.
Yeah, to Mrs. McCabe's point, I agree. And I agree that it's everything I've heard, it is the gold standard, and everything logic tells me that it would be the gold standard. I'll say that I was disappointed for 13 years that it didn't happen when it did. So, or when it was supposed to. So if there's a way, and it's within our resources, I'm not opposed to that by any stretch. I would encourage us to consider all things, even things we took off the table before, such as multi-site dual language. If that is a direction we're going, and that's something that might make it economically feasible, then I think that's something that we need to possibly consider.
Oh, I was gonna ask along those lines, right? As that committee, and again, if we can go back to our feedback pieces in here. For the different models, as we're considering the options.
Yeah.
From a resource standpoint, if we need to involve business services, if we need to start modeling some stuff out, I think we need it in that feedback loop is my thought.
Absolutely. Well, we will absolutely run it through business service. I mean, we're already there.
As you
right?
guys
Yeah.
as you guys start to get to draft state, right? And
Yeah.
as you're looking for it, like, I think that might be a time to do, the committee to surface it up and then start looking through it so that we can, give some feedback and ask some pieces on that. Cause again, as you've heard multiple times, right? It's a priority. We have all these things. So let's shrink any of those timelines if we can, by engaging on that.
Yeah, Mr. Attaway already has that piece down and one of the draft agenda items for business services that we see those resources.
One more piece of clarification before we move on. It was something that Mr. Lackner had stated that dawned on me. I never asked you as we were going over this information. So with these evidence-based practices, the one-way dual language, two-way dual language, self-contained TBE, and collaborative model TBE, would we say this is an exhaustive list of what other districts are doing? Are there other potential opportunities for us to seek out, see if, again, to his point, if other districts are doing something different, or would everything kind of fall within the umbrella of these 4 types of offerings, and there might be nuance within the offerings?
I would say it's the nuance within, but they very much these are the service delivery models, and they look this is pretty much them. The flexibility comes in how you do each of these and what that looks like.
Could you almost, maybe it's not the right word, but could you almost hybridize maybe a collaborative TBE with a two-way dual language, provide some aspects of that in that collaborative environment?
It would be really hard because they have 2 different goals. And by literacy,
Right.
I'm not saying no, it's just that it's just not the goal, and therefore it would, we wouldn't be doing it well.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean.
fair point. So.
Mhm.
I do want to express that I appreciate the depth that you're going into with this, because this is an opportunity for us to
Yeah.
do it really well.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate it's being on a school board is not the easiest job in the world by any means, because you're looking at how to govern and how to watch your resources. So I appreciate that you have made that part of the conversation,
Yeah.
because I think the board will embrace those the reality of what we
You've
can.
taught me well. All of you have taught me well. This is the last one. It's just the timeline of that work. Here's what we've completed. Here's what's in progress, and here's what's upcoming. Take a minute to just talk about high school math.
So far, we have not done really well. If I'm just giving feedback.
And before,
As our process observer, is that what you're saying?
before we do move on, just for a moment, I'd like to say, the spirit of this presentation that we put together here was to just provide clarity of all of the different various things. I mean, I found myself wondering the difference between it and each acronym and what that means and what's the delivery model. And so our hope was that it would not only provide clarity to the board, but to the public and anybody that's listening in. We welcome questions and feedback as always. So we appreciate you putting this together. It certainly helped me to understand significantly better, not fully, but significantly better than I
It
once
is
did.
very complicated. It really is. All right, so just talking about math, I want to kind of ground this work back in our curriculum assessment and instruction process. We're in year 3 of kind of implementing this new process. So we've used this process to do K-8 ELA. We used it to do social studies 6-12 last year. So this is a process that it's new to us, but we continue to use it. And it really does provide a big framework for us to do our work. It's the system, if you will, or the structure within the system that allows the people to do the work that we would like them to do. And this structure really puts in a robust framework because it allows and really focuses in on first establishing and understanding what is our current state, what is working in our system, what is not working within our curriculum. It then says, let's look at what does the evidence say we should be doing? What does that look like? And how does all that play into what it should look like? And then what is it that our benchmark and our aspirational districts are doing? And that conversation is just not only resources, but a lot of times around instruction. What and how are you approaching this? And we take all of that information to say, based upon that, what is it that we need in our resource, right? And we create a rubric that says, these are the things that we are taking and these are the things that we are looking for. And so once we have that rubric, we use that rubric to determine what resources are we going to bring vendors in for? Once we listen to vendors, we use that same rubric to decide which ones are we going to field test. We field test those resources and then we make a decision. And I think it's really important that we do all of those things. Probably the most important is the field test because everything looks good in a shiny wrapper, right? And everything looks good when you're flipping through it, but you actually need to teach it to know that it has it, it doesn't have it, it has too much, like the feedback that we get from that field test tells us what is actually usable. So we don't spend money on something that sits on a shelf somewhere. So these are the ones that are kind of in our process this year. And I highlighted Algebra 1 because I just wanted to talk through our thinking in our process around why Algebra 1. And so in the past, we have done it where we have done like algebra, geometry, Algebra 2, and we've kind of done them all together. But we really felt like algebra is our foundational course. It is the foundation of what we're doing. And without that, it springboards kids forward. And it's what we need to be targeting in elementary and middle school. Like, what are those skills? So until we have that course and we understand what is happening in that course, we really can't have conversations about what should be happening in middle school, what should be happening as we move through that process. So that decision and that conversation really came through conversations with our department chairs, with our teachers. This really is one of the things that the math department's been asking us for years about is like, can we please do backwards design, right? Like, what is that going from? So we started with, here's where we want kids. We like AP pre-calc or AP stats, right? If there hadn't been any acceleration. But before we can even build those classes, we got to make sure this foundational course is in place and that we understand what needs to happen in that course so that we can build on both sides. Now, that doesn't mean we do nothing, right? In middle school, we're using that resource and we have identified that we need to build procedural fluency. We know our resource, that's an area of focus for us, and we have built that in. So this year, for the first time, we have updated our end of the unit assessments to include that procedural fluency as well as that math reasoning. So we have those pieces in place. Do we have everything? Probably not. We'll know better once we know what's in that algebra class, because while we do well in middle school, right? We know that. That's how well we did on the standards. And sometimes there's things outside the standards that we need to leverage in order to get to what we need to do in Algebra 1. So that's really the work that we're doing. And that is the focus on the why Algebra 1. We really, once that, it also allows us to roll it out and provide support, right? It doesn't put a lot of strain on L&T because we're not trying to support Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, right? We're going to be able to support that out because a resource is one step towards getting us in the right direction, but that resource needs to be paired with instruction. And then how do I use this resource to effectively get to the goal? And this really allows us to put services and supports in place.
Do you think, with that focus, I like how you explained it. Do you think that then the next steps will go, if I say faster, I don't mean skipping steps, but having that course solid and everybody in the teaching math will understand that and have that instructional and the resource and all that, that the next step, and I know you're still doing lots of work with other courses, but then it builds to having a stronger math experience for all
Across the
students.
board. Yeah. I see us still moving slowly, geometry, then algebra 2. Maybe something will come up that we see there's a quick and easy place. But again, we want to make sure that we stop, we do it well, and we don't create gaps for kids. Because when we do that, sometimes what happens is the kid who hasn't been through the whole process finds themselves like we're trying to fill gaps for them. And then that can create some issues and concerns for us as well. Plus, I think there's some work we want to do in geometry around, we need more things in geometry to make sure that we're keeping skills going. And so we want to be real thoughtful about what are the skills we taught in Algebra 1 that we want to maintain? How do they repeat themselves in geometry and how do they leverage what's happening? You know what I'm saying? That we're building that very intentionally.
Dr. Igo, just a quick point of clarification. So you had mentioned we need to leverage sometimes things outside of the standards. Is this feedback that you're receiving from the educators, from the kind of boots on the ground folks? And they're seeing
It
what?
was a combination, but yeah, it started with them saying those things and us saying, well, tell me more about that. And then us doing a little bit of research and yeah, I see that now. So let's make sure we put those things in place.
And that's encouraging because I think sometimes, the standards are obviously meant to be a nice framework for things. But if our valued educators are coming to us and saying, these kids are coming to us and they're ill prepared for
Yep.
exactly what we need to teach them. So I'm very encouraged to hear that we're hearing the voice of the teacher and those who are, directly responsible for educating the kids.
Here, I just kind of wanted to highlight who's on the committee. I think it's real important to see that it's elementary, it's middle and high school teachers, but more importantly, it also represents not just our Algebra 1 teachers, it also represents Algebra 2, calculus teachers. Everybody has a stake in algebra going well and that being done right. And you can see that in the group of people we have as members of our committee.
Also think that highlights to your point, Mr. Kuchar, when you're able to bring people of various backgrounds together, you are seeing some of those gaps. Yes, those are the standards of algebra. However, when we're seeing our students in geometry and in these different courses, that's where we have some really good insight. So that's why I really appreciate that slide and that they're not all Algebra 1 just teachers. And again, our teachers teach generally more than one.
Yes, that's true. Nobody just teaches Algebra 1.
Yeah, we don't have just an Algebra 1 teacher out there. So yeah, to your point.
And I also wonder, these conversations have an impact on the instruction that they take, what they have learned and talked about in these meetings goes back to their everyday work.
Yep.
I would assume Mr. McNally and I have had many committee meetings in our education where I learned something from a colleague or from that discussion that I will take back.
Absolutely.
So it isn't just, we're going to wait till there's a deadline and then.
Absolutely. And the PLC process has got us thinking and processing and talking all the time about what's working, what's not working, and where do we fill things in? How do we help move kids forward?
So this just really puts a time frame in where we've done a lot of the research in terms of what are the strengths within our processes and our pathways. What are our benchmark and aspirational districts doing? We've taken that back to the department to kind of build that framework. They, as a department, looked and made some decisions about what vendors they wanted to bring in. So November 1st, they're bringing the vendors in. So they'll be doing that process and then they'll whittle that down yet again. And then that will turn into a field test that will take place and we will be back here. We hope in March, maybe April, but we're hoping for March with the recommendation of what comes next.
And if at all possible, if part of that review of the aspirational and comparable districts could include those who may have changed their resources recently or relatively recently, where we might be able to see the progress, incremental progress of those districts. If some of them have changed it within the last couple of years and we're seeing significant jumps, there may be something there. I'm sure that's already on your radar, but I suspect the board would want to hear those things also, how quickly we're able to see these students advance and improve.
Yeah, I think once we really narrow in on what are we going to field test, we'll take that deeper dive. Yeah. Right. That is all I've got.
So that was our first chance at doing a CAO update. One of the things that we'll try to do is make sure that they're not so meaty in there because those were two big
Big things,
meaty
yeah.
topics. But again, the gist of this is that we have an opportunity to update the board on different pieces before we get into the already scheduled agenda items.
Yep, and I certainly appreciated the robust conversation. I think I have about 5 pages of handwritten notes so that we will be sure to cover each of those questions when we meet. That brings us on to item 3A for discussion, high school course recommendations.
We're going to bring Monica Bailey up, who is in charge of she's an associate director of curriculum for high school, and she's going to talk with us. We really only have one new course that we want to bring forward, and this really starts to build that. What we're bringing forward is the pathway, if you will, our first regional pathway that students would have options to participate in. I'm going to turn it over.
Hello, everybody. You have the clicker, Christine. Do you want to, you can click. It's a. Great. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Monica Bailey, Associate Director of High School Curriculum. And this evening, I'm excited to share an opportunity that we have about the Veterinary Assistant Program. It's a regional CTE program available to our students and how it's a model for some of our post-secondary career options for our students. So I always want to stay anchored in our core values and looking for the opportunities that we can have for students in belonging, perseverance, and achievement. And really looking at our pathways and looking at our strategic priorities, we would really look at this one in the collaboration with families and community members about what kind of programming a lot of students are interested in. The instructional coherence of looking at a rigorous program that within the CTE realm of where students can develop post-secondary credentials. And also looking at pathways that honor the culture of dignity of career interests for students. And so this is the Veterinary Assistant Program located at Central High School. And this program has been deemed by the U.S. Department of Education as something they call a quality program for CTE pathways, which means it has all the components of what we want to model a CTE pathway around. And we're really fortunate to have it close to us. It's within our region. It's accessible for us and our students. So this model was introduced by Christine back in May about talking about what kind of models we look for career pathway systems. And we look for a vision of allowing students to do something called like stackable credentials, that within high school, they're taking rigorous programming, but they can also earn post-secondary credit. They are able to go straight into institutions of higher learning in CTE, 2-year universities, 4-year universities, technical schools, and that it really aligns to their goals in career. And we want to offer a wide range of opportunities. We have obviously a lot of students with a lot of career interests. And so this is an idea of how we build a model for students to be able to pursue what they want in a pathway through our programming. And so there's really, when we look at these goals, we're looking at the college, career, and life ready. whether a student is going to college or not, every student is preparing for a career. And so we need to make sure that we integrate this kind of learning throughout our programming. And so this is part of that transitioning to post-secondary goals for our students. All right, so we are within Region 110 in Northern King County. So the state of Illinois has recognized that CTE Pathways is very ambitious, and it requires quite a bit of coordination of resources. A lot of it has to do with facilities. You know, there's only so many facilities we can build for CTE Pathways. And so they arrange us around our community college region so we can share the load with each other. So if there's a welding program at one institution, there might be something somewhere else. And so our 4 school districts here make up the feeder districts to ECC, and we are coordinating together, and I collaborate very frequently with the members of each of these school districts. So we all work together for common programming that we can offer to our students. And so some of the CTE programs are called regional programs. That means every student can access those programs. And so the one that we are looking at is located at Central High School, a veterinary tech program. And you can see here kind of the sample pathway. Starting sophomore year, students would take Introduction to Agricultural Science, Intro to Ag. And then that's kind of an orientation course and will eventually become a dual credit course. They're still working on some of the behind the scenes paperwork, as you imagine, that takes quite a bit of time to negotiate those agreements. The second course will be Veterinary Science 1, which is also a dual credit class, and gets the kids into internships and externships, and then Vet Science 2. The model up here is a very similar model that you'll see coming out of a lot of the CTE programming, where we also suggest what other core classes you would take alongside these CTE pathways. So we always want to partner our pathway with the kind of core courses that offer a rigorous learning experience. We can see here, this is again another model of a pathway, and I'm showing these as examples because in the spring, we'll be showing you a few more models. This is one of my big projects this year. So this is our first kind of looking at how we look at orientation courses all the way through capstone courses and some of the requirements in a pathway. And again, this was agriculture, food, and natural sciences. So here are some photos of the veterinary assistant classroom at Central High School. You can see that it is fully equipped. It's got examination tables, veterinary equipment, and kennels. Staff are actually allowed to bring their dogs to school so that the vet tech students can actually try out on live patients. And they do exotic animals, so people can bring in their like bearded dragons and things like that. And they also bring in livestock for certain units of study. So I'm sure Mr. McNally can speak to some of this, I'm sure.
I have some exotic animals in my lab that they've already propositioned me to use.
To bring them into the program. And so there's a lot of really unique studies. You can see actually they have even unequipped X-ray equipment, but they can actually try out what the equipment looks like. And they do all of the lab science expertise in this area as well. There is attached to it another classroom portion, so it's both classroom and lab, and then the kennels out the back door in the back of the facilities. Some of the program highlights, there's a lot to highlight here. Students get to earn something that we call an industry recognized credential, or an IRC, and that is to become a veterinary assistant. So far, 100% of the students who have emerged from this program have passed that test. And so they all emerge as a vet assistant. Central High School staff works really hard in order to provide internships and externships for all students. 100% of the students participate in these internships. They can participate in the District 301 FFA chapter, which actually has won 2 national championships in the past 2 to 3 years. And every graduate of this program is guaranteed acceptance to the Fox Valley College Veterinary Tech Program, which is in Tinley Park, and they also receive tuition assistance. With time, we expect the dual credit options to roll through, and then students will also be able to earn 12 dual credit, like college credits out of this program. So our timeline, back in the spring, we had quite a few. We did 2 different visits out to Central High School, and we worked with the D303 staff. We had district level administrators, building level administrators, counselors, department chairs, any number of other staff. And we visited Central. We got to tour the facility, see the classes in action, talk with students, talk with the staff. And right now we are asking for the course to be added to the D303 course offering book so that it can begin to be available for our students in our community. We would expect then in the next fall, a year from now, cohort 1 would start in their intro to ag class at Central High School. And then if those students decide to continue, they would be in Vet Science 1, and then cohort 2 would start in Intro to Ag. And then we'd have 3 cohorts if they follow the entire programming in the 27-28 school year. And so we want to roll this out in that way where students can sign on. We're anticipating that eventually it'd be sophomores who would take Intro to Ag, but if offered next year, we would anticipate that perhaps some juniors might sign up. We have some students who are very passionate about veterinary assistance and being a veterinarian. So we anticipate that there are some very students who are very passionate about this area, we'll say. The tuition per student is $1,500, and we would anticipate, we based our estimate here on 10 students. And the reason we picked that, we looked at the enrollment of District 300 and U46, which have been partnered with this program for several years now. In District 300, they have 6,400 high school students who are eligible, and they send 12 students to this program. In U46, there's about 11,000 high school students, and they send 7. So this is really targeted for students who are passionate about that science, and they really know that this is the pathway they want. It gets them into the veterinary programs very quickly.
So with that said, you wouldn't anticipate that we would be capped at a certain amount of students if we had an abundance of students that were interested in this? What might that look like? Do
I
we
did
have
ask.
a space that is
Yeah.
allocated for us, or how does that work?
So I talked with Central High School about how they do the scheduling, and what they do is they work with our building schedulers, and they ask us when we want our kids scheduled. So if we said we want it first hour, then they would schedule all of our students into first hour, and then they would work with 300 and do the same thing in U46, and then they can schedule their own students wherever they want. And so there isn't a cap anticipated for this program because they're able to schedule around it. And they keep hiring more staff. So there are 2 certified vet tech assistants who work there, one of which is also co-certified as a science teacher. And then they have an intro to ag teacher who's also a science teacher. So they have 3 full-time staff already there, and they're anticipating hiring more if the demand is there. The way they have the flexible space is when some are in the classroom, some can be in the lab. So they're not anticipating it getting capped, and they work through everyone's scheduling process to get the class where it makes sense in our partnership. So they've had some experience with the other 2 school districts to make sure, what are the logistics behind all of this communication. Students would eventually have to generate a transcript, obviously from the dual credit, transcript, within different school districts. So there's a little bit of that logistical on the back end, but they have all of the experts to guide students through that process.
From a scheduling perspective, right? We will have to have this kind of figured out before the rest of our schedule, right? Or just, can you talk a little bit about how that would work for us?
When we get into the logistics, what Central does is they look at their bell schedule and all of the partner district bell schedules.
Yeah.
And when we would probably block it and say, we want this first hour. Now, I'm going to defer to Dr. Christensen, who is a lot more expert at master schedule building. That is not my area of expertise, but we would make sure that it was blocked at a certain time to arrange for the transportation time as well.
Right.
And it's similar to how we have students go to Fox Valley. We build around the time that makes sense, and we coordinate with all of those master schedules together. So we're not new to that process. This would just be a new location for that process.
A new variable that we're trying to.
So there's a lot of transportation cost
There
and
is.
complexity associated in this. So we have an ongoing exercise in re-envisioning the high school experience. So
Mhm.
I have a couple of specific questions about this program and then some about the high school experience effort. And I'll just give you a couple about the program
Sure.
itself. How long has Central been running the program? And then from which institution do you anticipate dual credit would be granted?
Right now they are working, I can go back here. They're working on Kishwaukee Community College. And so that is where they have the partnerships. There's a lot of logistics. Teachers have to get like the dual enroll. They have to be approved by the university and then they both have to sign. They're also pursuing if Kishwaukee does not follow through with this, they're also looking at Joliet Community College, which also has a veterinary science program. So they have to target universities that have a vet science, which is not something that we have at ECC, nor something that we would offer within our own school district.
Thank you for that. It looks like the primary cost driver here is twofold. One, the scheduling complexity. That's not lost on me. The second is a more direct cost, which is transportation. How many programs and pathways do we expect would come out of the re-envisioning of the high school experience that will require off-campus transportation? We have intra-district programming within the high schools that require transportation, meaning students who move from one building to another, be it campus to homeschool or from east to north. So we have that transportation challenge. We have Fox Valley. Now we have this. How many of these can we stomach? And I recognize Mr. Attaway's absent today, but how many programs do we envision and how many could we manage with the transportation challenge that we face today?
It's up to you. You can take it that way.
I think those are really good questions, and I think they're questions actually we have engaged in as a group ourselves and having to make some decisions as we move through this process. I don't know that we anticipate a significant number of more regional pathways.
Yeah.
I think this one is unique and different and it offers something that we can't offer someplace else. I think the pathways that we are looking to build would be within our system and would not necessarily require kids to move, with the exception of maybe north to east or east to north, depending like on culinary, maybe some stuff or autos might, but our goal would be to offer them both in both places as we continue to build that out. So I think that's a piece of that, but we have been starting the conversation around how many of these what is the best way for us to leverage kind of our partners in terms of Fox Valley, as well as, you know, our community college. And we know that through that PACE framework, they really would like us to use our community college and use those places to build our college pathways and to provide students with that experience.
So I appreciate that point. I think it's a good, you know, it's the right exploration. It's not lost on me that the assets have been paid for by 301 through whatever means, and we have the opportunity to utilize those assets. That lab picture is quite fancy looking. On the other hand, when I look at the numbers between 57 and 71,000 per year of direct incremental cost, I have to ask the question, what will we avoid doing? What will we be unable to do if we select this? Every program looks fantastic in isolation. This one certainly does, and the asset utilization issue makes it maybe that much more attractive. On the other hand, I've yet to see what other programs we might want to spend money on as a district coming out of that re-envisioning of the high school experience. And so my current perspective is this looks like a fantastic program. If we had infinite budget, I would say let's spend the money now and let's open the program. On the other hand, you know, $75,000 a year into infinity until we decide to exit the program is a liability that we would take on without recognizing any trade-off. And so for me, I'm just wondering, are we too early here? And while we might miss, you know, one cohort of kids, if we deferred this discussion until after the discussion about the high school experience, we'd have a better sense as a board of the trade-offs that we want to make for student outcomes. When I look at the numbers of students impacted, it's a relatively small number of students for a high dollar value. And when I think about the percentages that we talk about often in terms of 85% consistently seeking that college experience, what percentage of these kids do we expect would also be college bound versus going right into the workforce? And so is this targeted at the 15% or at the 85%? And it looks like it's commingled based on interest, which is fine. It just strikes me that where it fits in our portfolio of offerings is ill-defined. So it's a wonderful looking program. And I think Future Farmers of America would be happy to have some D303 students engaged. At the same time, I'm just left wondering where it fits.
And those are all really fair questions. And I
Yeah.
think they're things that we need to, kind of process through, and we are still envisioning what those pathways could possibly look like. And so you might be right that maybe we're a little too soon to bring that forward. I do want to say one of the nice things about the way we are changing our thinking towards CTE is that it's that stackable. So I remember I got the opportunity to go and visit and spend time in those classrooms. One of the things that struck me is there were kids who came out of there who went directly into the vet school at U of I, right? And this experience allowed for that to happen. So like you said, there are kids in here who are definitely pursuing college, kids who might go straight to work. So it's
Dr. Igo, that's a really fantastic point. Maybe what we ought to be getting back to is for the kids in 301 who go through this, what are their destinations? For the kids from 46 or from 300,
definitely find that out.
let's
I feel
figure
like
out
they
where
gave
they're
that to us,
headed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that. What were the outcomes, right? Because this is one where a vet tech, once they get this, they can actually start working while they're in
Yes.
school, right? And they will have, potential work programs, other pieces, right? But that's the piece that I think, again, back to what we've been talking about, the different pathways. If this gives them a leg up into that program at U of I or at the other schools, I think that's something that we've talked about previously. That's something that elevates and that improves it. So that would be
Yes.
valuable data for me.
These
as
are
a-
very highly sought after students.
Right.
They often get hired right out of their internship
Right.
experience.
Right. And again, we want that
Mhm.
again. So that to me is something that I definitely would like to see. But I also agree with you. And that's why I asked the question about the scheduling for where are we putting this, right? Because we've heard, there are trade-offs, especially for our high achieving students or other students when they're trying to fit in the schedule, right?
Mhm.
We know that we've only got a certain number of hours and schedulable blocks in the day and the week. And so for me to help with that, like, I'd love to see, like, where we're at. My question was gonna be, Christine, where are we at? I know that we're in process on that, but if you could just give kind of
Yeah.
a little thing just to help me kind of.
Yeah, if I can put that in the weekly update or wherever, like whatever the best places for that,
Yeah.
we have a
I'm trying to
plan.
remember
I
I'm
just
trying
can't.
to remember your timeline slide and
Like-
it's not coming back all the
I know,
way.
and it's pretty and it's color coded. I just can't remember off the
Yeah.
top of my head. So I will get that to you.
So with this one, we would bring this back I apologize, Mr. McNally. Would the board want this back with more information at the board meeting, but put it under action so we can give you more information? What would the board like as far as our normal timeline on this piece?
Well, what I think I heard Mr. Lackner say is he wants to know about the other programs
Correct.
before we make a decision. on
Yeah, so
this
we
one.
would bring back that information. So my intent was, if we were to provide the board at the next board meeting, regular board meeting, would we put it under action?
Well,
Sorry,
Dr. Gordon, my position is whatever information that you bring back about this specific program will be insufficient for me to vote yes to this program. So at present, until I see where this fits in the portfolio of elements that are part of that high school renewal, I would want to keep that $75,000 a year in the district's coffers rather than commit to spending it.
so what I heard was then if all the other board members agree that we'd bring this back to another L&T meeting.
So just for clarity's sake. This, right, like this would need to go into the course booklet, which is done for scheduling in January, so
Right.
November, yeah. Which is okay. I mean, I'd like the opportunity. You may still say that this doesn't meet the criteria. I'd like the opportunity to come back at least and show you what we were thinking and where it might fit. It may not meet what you're exactly looking for, but at least let's like to lay it out.
I like it. So
If
let's
that's okay.
add it
I'm okay
to
with that.
discussion at a board meeting. without action.
Well, I think, Dr. Gordon, if it's, we don't have a vote here tonight, I think it's, if the board's willing to go through the conversation and have it as a 4-action item in
Okay.
discussion, I don't see an objection to that. Just please recognize.
It may not go.
Yeah, it may or may not fly.
I like it. Okay, so board meeting, action with a robust discussion attached to it prior to any action.
So I feel I'd be remiss if I didn't comment on the program because I do have some firsthand experience with not only the program itself, it's right downstairs from my classroom. I can't speak to obviously comparative value nor the logistics. But anecdotally, I can say the students that I've encountered who are in this program, I've had them in my AP biology class. I've had them in my regular biology class, and they tend to be some of my better students. So, and the program itself, I see as a very well organized. So and again, insufficient, I know for your purposes, I do see it as a quality program. Happy to see that we're considering it. I don't know that, kind of where all things will go. But from a qualitative perspective, I can say that it's really, I think it's a solid program, and I see it as well organized, well run. And it's really a program that everybody in the school is pretty proud of.
One last quick question for me, and you might have said this when I was jotting down some notes. When we talk about the veterinary assistant program, the rubric here for the pricing, when it says assumes 10 students, is that us assuming 10 students? Is that the district that we're
That
sending
is
them to
us.
assuming 10 students?
I made that estimate based on the enrollment from District 300 and U46.
Yeah, I think you had mentioned is
Yeah.
11 students and 7 students respectively.
Yeah,
So in the event that we did not provide that, is it still on a student by student basis and we would simply be paying for the amount of students?
correct.
Transportation would be relatively fixed, whether we're sending 10 or 7. But I was just curious as to if that increased enrollment number was something that we would be committing to or something that would be based off of how many students are showing interest.
Nope, we can, it's not a set amount that we have to send at all.
Okay,
It
and
can
then-
change every year.
Thank you for that. Last question is there too few of students that would be interested in which they would not run the class in the event that we're sending them 2 or 3?
That's an excellent question. I don't have an answer to that one, but that's something that we can definitely consider. I know when we spoke with our school counselors, this one comes up a lot because it's got a strong reputation that this is a great program that our students want access to. How many? I don't know. That's always a question when we put the course offering book of which classes are going to be, people who want to commit to them. We assumed, like what Mr. McNally said, that a lot of the students would come out of strong science classes. So the recruitment would really come out of biology freshman year, where we would talk to students about this opportunity.
Well, great. So we can maybe, I'm sorry, one
Okay.
second, just to follow up. So maybe we can see if there is a minimum amount of students and then perhaps if there's an opportunity to commingle with other districts. I don't
Mhm.
even know if that would be permitted. But we.
With busing or with?
No, meaning within the classroom. You had said that they designate certain periods based off of
Yeah.
when another district may be interested and then they shuffle their students accordingly.
Mhm.
So perhaps if there is, fewer amount of students and the board is pleased with this as an option, we might be able to get a little bit more clarity on those 2 items.
Yes.
Let me,
Absolutely.
let me add one more because the costs
Yeah.
that you laid out are all variable costs about individual student tuition and the
Mhm.
transportation costs. Are there any fixed costs for the district to participate? Do we have to contribute to the offset of any of the capital associated with the program? Are there any other fees that we have to pay to have access?
No, because it's a designated regional program. And so our tuition in the $1,500 per student is the tuition that we pay to enter into it, but we are not responsible for any other costs.
So there's a second question probably for Dr. Igo, which is to whom does that 1,500 go? Is it 301? And secondarily, are there programs that we host that we should think of as potential inbound hosting for students?
So if I could answer that one,
Yeah,
I
please.
just put the slide up of ones that we're considering hosting in-house. So if you notice, these are some of the pathways that our students have identified through a local needs assessment as high interest pathways that we would want to develop in-house to be available to our students. And so we have talked with, there's obviously some long application process with the state. There's a lot of things that you have to put into place, especially with agreements with post-secondary credits that are available. And so these are some of the top ones that we've identified. Currently this year, I'm working with our Project Lead the Way teachers, and we're building out engineering. And we are also looking at business and financial services are the two that we're working on this year. And one of our goals is to hopefully be a destination program.
No, I don't want to put more work on our counselors or our teachers, but just curious, right? I know that there's been interest expressed, and again, I'm super excited about seeing this slide because I've gotten feedback from community members that, hey, I didn't even know we had access to like the CNC lab or, you know, other things within the district. We have incredible assets, right? But I'd love to know, like, informally, what do the counselors think we would get as an enrollment for this if we were to offer this? Right? Because they know.
You can ask.
Yeah,
Well,
like
definitely,
that
they'll
would
have
just,
an idea of how many kids that
That's-
they know, like whether the kids will commit to it, but kids who have shown interest
Yes.
or expressed a desire,
and I
they'll
do,
know
and
who
I
they
do,
are.
and I definitely, I don't want to be, you know, like, hey, but just if we can pull them, just get an idea, because
We can
again,
do a
that
straw
for
poll.
me, especially from, you know, from the community, like if we do have a ton of students who are interested in this, that would help me, you know, as I'm thinking through this. So.
That's fantastic.
Last little tiny tidbit. You know, if there are any unforeseen consequences of this program, right? As in, we're having them take a class that may take the place of another course that they may be required to take for a highly selective institution. I know we've had some discussion for that, especially for programs that are very challenging to get in, and you must have the appropriate credits to do so. So, you know, sometimes I think a program like this is fantastic, and it may have, you know, again, an unforeseen consequence to it. So I don't know how we would necessarily look into that, but if there's a way for us to determine what it might be in place of that they would be taking this coursework, I think we could just make sure that we don't have, again.
I think a great place
a
for us to
trouble
look
spot.
would be those students who have gone into the U of I program, right, in their veterinary program.
Absolutely.
The only thing that I would add to this from a high level conversation, first, Dr. Igo, I am just like blown away with where we're at. Dr. Bailey, all this work around our pathways. Board, we've been talking about this for close to a year and a half around those pathways. When I look at slide 9, I'm just going to hold it up. I believe this is what the board was envisioning when they were talking about. So as an 8th grader, as a middle school student, what is my pathway? How do I follow through? I want to do these pieces. And then I looked to this slide that you have up right now, Dr. Bailey, about potential pathways. But again, highlighting slide 9. I think, again, I love the fact that at this table and at many other tables, we've talked about opportunities and pathways for our students to truly lay out how am I as a student able to reach this vet tech idea or education or business science, whatever it may be. We're seeing our first piece of evidence. I'm not sure where this is going to land, and it's not about this course. I'm just incredibly proud of all the work that went in to this, proud of the board's conversation about where we want to go as an organization. But I think the board is seeing the fruits of those conversations and the hard work that occurs on a daily basis to make this happen, because this is a coordinated effort. This is not a simple effort. Anytime you're talking about dual credit, that is an arm twisting with our community colleges to be super kind. They're very challenging, but I'm just really pleased. So thank you for everybody else within L&T and within our high schools as well, because I know there was a lot of counselors and other members who were a part of this. This was a small and mighty team putting some really good pieces together for us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that will move us right along to item 3B, elementary school summer review program.
Yeah, we're going to bring up Jared Buxton to kind of talk us through our elementary summer school.
Good evening. Tonight, we're going to be reviewing our 2024 elementary summer school data, looking at what we were able to collect from our participants from the summer school program, determine the impact the program had on student regression, and make a recommendation for summer of 2025. As always, we're going to ground ourselves into our strategic plan and our core values. Particularly, our summer school program afforded our students the opportunity to maintain some of the friendships with their classmates and teachers, but also build new friendships with some of the students they had class with. But we're also going to be examining our system to provide additional learning opportunities to students that they may minimize the impact of the summer regression. When we look at our strategic priorities, we're really going to be looking at three items: responsible, transparent stewardship of our resources, but also those equitable systems of supports and those equitable programs and practices that we have for our students. I'm actually going to start the presentation with just a gist of the data. And so you're going to see here the data is side by side, but overall, we're going to notice that students who attended summer school 80% or more of the days, that meant that they are there 12 days or more, experience less regression in both reading and math compared to the two prior summer breaks. So again, this data is looking student by student. It's comparing a kid to him or herself based on their spring 2024 to fall 2024. Again, that's going to measure that level of regression and putting that side by side with their previous two summers. However, we needed to try to isolate that variable of it being the summer school that's leading to that impact. So we wanted to make sure to look at several other control groups, and those were our summer school attendees who attended less than 80% of the days, the attendees or the students that were invited because they met the criteria to attend summer school, but they did not attend, and then our students that did not get the invite because they did not meet the criteria for invite. In all of these different groups compared with each other, we did not see anything that was statistically significant to indicate that it was the summer school that led to that initial data point.
Oh, and Jared, can you just refresh us really quickly
Yeah.
on the cohort that you selected specifically?
It's coming. Yep.
Okay.
So yeah, now we're going to go into a review because I don't expect you to remember since March because that was the last presentation on summer school. So the next several slides is going to just back up and bring us everyone back up to speed. So let's remember that here was our objective of summer school. We wanted to provide our students additional learning opportunities, ability to engage in grade level task, grade level text, grade level standards, use that acceleration model because these were students that had momentum. We were looking at data points from earlier in the school year. They were experiencing greater than typical growth, but they were still not achieving the standards. We wanted to capitalize on that momentum to put them in the summer school program in an effort to reduce the summer slide that they might experience between end of May and middle of August. We had very specific criteria that we were looking for, and I actually just kind of discussed it, but we were really looking at three different types of students that we were going to be inviting. First is what I just indicated, looking at students making greater than typical growth from fall to winter on iReady, both reading and math, but yet they were still not up to the standard. So on iReady, it's a 5-point scale. So we were looking at some students that were at a 1, some that were at a 2, some that were at a 3. You really need to get to that 4 before you're meeting standard. So we are looking at students from all 3 of those buckets, as long as they were meeting that exceeding the typical growth. We also invited each student that was being served in our dual language program, and we also invited any student that registered as a newcomer during the 23-24 school year. Proud to say we did have 283 students attend our summer school. We did have about 505 invitations that went out. We had to keep going back to the invite list as, for a variety of reasons, summer vacations, different camps already enrolled in. Families weren't necessarily able to commit to the time. And so we kept putting additional invitations out there because we wanted to fill the seats and provide the opportunity to our students. Of those 283 students, 165 of them, or 58%, actually attended 80% or more of the days. And I'll cover this on the next slide. But if you recall, summer school was 14 days. So it covered 3 weeks, but one of the days in the middle week was a holiday, June 19th. So we had 14 days of contact time. And so to reach that 80% threshold of attendance, you need to be there 12 days or more. I also then broke down that student group who attended 80% or more, and 67 students, multilingual, attended 80% or more. 43 students from our dual language attended 80% or more, and then 42 students that have IEPs attended 80% or more of our 14 days. And again, just a reminder, this program ran June 10th to June 28th. It was a 4-hour day. We did do Mondays through Fridays. A typical 4-hour day had 2 hours of literacy, 1 hour of math, and then 1 hour of a variety of things, enrichment opportunities, SEL morning meetings, movement breaks, snack breaks. But that was a very consistent schedule for our learners in those 4 hours. We did have roughly 3 sections per grade level with 2 outliers. The numbers had 4 sections of second grade and only 2 sections of 5th grade. And those class sizes range from 14 to 19. I think we had 6 or 7 classes over 17 students. Here's just a little bit of a snapshot of the financial impact, including the overall cost per pupil. So when it comes to staffing, this includes our certified teachers. This includes our paraprofessionals. We did hire 1 multilingual educator per grade level to support students with language needs. We offered our families transportation who qualified for it. The curriculum materials, the enrichment activities, came to a total of $209,608.36. When you take that by the 283 attendees, it came out to a cost per pupil of $740.67. These next 3 slides, I'm going to give you more data sliced a couple of different ways to just see the way we kind of unpacked this to try to get at the level of impact. So this very first slide that we're going to look at is measuring our students' spring of 2024, so May of their last school year, with their fall of 2024, which they take in August and September here, from this school year. And on iReady, each student gets something called a scale score, and that's their score on their reading or math diagnostic. And so what you're seeing here is the average scale score, either net gain or net drop, based on the 4 different student groups that we're going to look at here in tonight's presentation. So for our students who attended 80% or more of summer school, their net change for their reading iReady spring to fall was a negative 4.8 scale score points. Compared with all attendees, that means any student that attended 1 day up to 11 days, because that was that threshold to get to 80%, those attendees' average scale score dropped 3.4 points. Those who met the criteria but didn't attend was a negative 2.5. And then those who did not meet the criteria still experienced a form of summer regression at negative 1.8 average scale score drop. See a little bit of a different picture for math. You see a bigger range of drop. Our 80% attendees with the average drop is 7.3. And then you can see there a little bit less of a drop than the all attendees and the invited, not quite as much to celebrate there compared to the not invited. I'll stop there. Any questions about this particular slide?
I just want to clarify the not invited is pretty much all other students.
Correct. The students that didn't meet the criteria for being invited. Yeah. So it's a much bigger sample size. Okay,
Are there any, when we look at these numbers at the aggregate, I just have to wonder, were there any outliers where we saw a significantly reduced slide spring to fall? And is there anything unique or special about those outlier cases that we ought to be looking at to say the summer program was uniquely effective for these students?
yeah, that's a good question. Mr. Shazar gave me this data and he absolutely broke it to anyone who grew 25 or more points or dropped by 25 or more points. There were absolutely some students in those buckets that grew more than 25 or less than 25. I don't know the number offhand. I don't remember it being something that was
Yeah, I
big
guess
number.
what I was trying to get to is regardless of the size of those buckets, if we look back at those students, it might be worth talking with them about their experience just to better understand what about the program helped them kind of squeeze the slide for them versus the ones who had, you know, in spite of the program, a big slide. I just
Correct.
wonder if there's some lesson for us to take out of that.
And the question I have on that, because I wrote that down, it's similar to Mr. Lackner's. Are there any commonalities among those who had that significant one way or the other? And was it broken down by group? So as I look, we, you know, on that page, slide 7 and 8, there's 2 different breakdowns. And I guess the two questions I have, and they're probably poorly framed questions, but I'm hoping you understand what I'm asking. How many were there from each group, and were there differences in progression or regression among those groups?
Yeah, I can actually get into that on the next
Yeah,
slide.
because
I
that's,
do break it down by
yeah,
group.
that's where I think, kind of to the same point Mr. Lackner's making, is there some group of people for whom this is most beneficial?
Yeah, so this slide might be a better way of looking at the data because this is comparing a student to him or herself. So what you're going to see here is, as you saw on the last slide, each group had some form of regression. That whether that was in the -7s, whether that was in the -1s, there was some form of regression in the average. So now we're simply going to take student by student and look at the amount of regression in the summer of 2024 and compare that same student to the amount of regression in the summer of 2023. So you see here for these 80% plus attendees, 62.5% of those students experienced less regression this past summer than they did the summer of 2023. Again, you start to think toward, was the summer school program, was that the variable that moved that needle? So again, it's important to look at some of the other student groups. For our students that attended 1 through 11 days or 1 through 79%, 58.7% of them experienced less regression compared to the previous summer. So again, these things are things to celebrate. And then for those whose data met the criteria to attend, but they weren't able to, 59.1% of those students experienced less regression than the summer of 2023.
Can I ask another question then that brings up, you know, it's causation and correlation, right? If there is, did we look at a trajectory of those students? So like, for example, the 62.5 who had less regression than the previous summer and 48.2 and 40. Could there be some of it have to do with levels of maturity as a student gets older, and are those students by grade level?
Well, it could be, because what we're going to do on the next slide is compare to 3 prior summers. So yeah, so you're going to start aging out some people from your testing group because they will have had to have 4 data points. And so you're only going to be capturing our 4th and 5th graders. But yeah, to your point, that certainly could have happened.
Can I jump in for just a
yeah.
second? I think one of the things, and again, I'm talking big picture, broad strokes, but as we played in the data, I think we would really clearly say, in reading, 4th and 5th graders were more likely to experience less, like there was more, we could see some more benefit there. And in math, it was 1, 2, I believe, which we thought was just it's interesting.
right? I think I have that right, reading and
Yeah.
math that way, yeah.
So I appreciate that nuance of it, right? Because that's one of the things that, like, you know, for me, I'm hoping to get out of this, you know, experiment. And first of all, I absolutely appreciate the read back. That's something that, you know, that I know it's a little bit new for us. And so this is great. The part, Jared, that I'm looking at, I like how it's broken down based on attendance. I'd love to see it based on the invitation criteria. And I know we had to go back to the well, right? To say, okay, you know, like we only got so many students from here, but I really loved when we initially put this together that we were targeting those students that had the diagnostic that were showing the growth. Right. And so the part that's, I think, kind of missing for me in this is I like the cut of the attendance, but I want to know for those students, like, what was the final number? Like, we invited, you know, quite a few of them. How many of them, what was their average? What was the reduction in the drop, right? Same thing for our dual language program, like that group of this cohort, what was their average drop? Same thing with the newcomer, right? Because if we're mashing them together in the, you know, based on their attendance things, I think it's great, but it's a different look at the data than I think what we started this experiment with. And that's something that I'd like to see is I love that data point of like, hey, if fourth graders, like maybe this, if we go back and retool this, maybe we say, hey, look, we're going to offer this at a fourth grade level because we know there's certain concepts in here that will help us in the long run, or there are certain things for reading where, hey, the phonics units in, you know, this grade are much more challenging, where we're seeing the growth. Maybe we can target it, right? That's for me strategically, if spending these dollars on it, because it's not, you know, this is a spend. This is to Mr. Lackner's earlier point about the programs. We're making a conscious decision here. What's going to get us the best results and help reduce some of these?
So,
I said a lot though, so you feel free to read me back.
We can certainly do that, but I think I'd like us to step back and just see the bigger picture of this, because I think my take, and I know Jared started here, is when, like, I'm agreed, like, the impact, generally speaking, the summer school, again, causation, correlate, all of those things play in here, but like, we didn't see anything that stood out to us at a significant difference, right? And so I said it looked better in fourth and fifth grade in reading, like, but that's not like significantly bad. Like, there wasn't a significant impact, just things that we saw, like, I really was like playing in the data. But I think before we talk about what are all the things we can do to be better, like, I just want to understand, like, that is the impact really what we want it to be? And we do have a slide where we talk about, here's what we need to do to get better, and then here's going to be that cost. And then I would ask that we weigh that in conjunction with what are all the other things that we're doing, and I love when you talk about those indirect costs of the time that takes to run these things and make those things happen. Is that where we want to put our time and energy, or is there someplace else we should be putting our time? I just would like to talk about it. in the
No,
whole.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the right conversation, right? I think if I retool my ask a little bit, back to our invitation criteria, what were the outcomes? If we just say like those 3 bullet points, how many did we end up getting, right? Because I know that was a challenge, right? And to your point on this, if we go back and look at the overall program, right? From an administration, the logistics of it, granted, this was the summer of construction and we had to pick which school we were doing it at, right? But like, to your point, I don't think it precludes the larger picture,
Mhm,
which, you know, I don't disagree
for
with it,
sure.
but
And just to know that when we pulled those lists, and I don't remember all the specifics, and Jared, you might, but I don't. We stuck to the criteria, but then we said, first and foremost, kids with English and reading or ELA. And like, there were criteria that we did every time we went back to the poll, and we can talk about what that looked like. And I'll have to make sure, see how those kids are marked, whether or not we can get you that data, but we'll look at it.
So when you come back, when you come to the numbers, there are some big ticket items. And you and I have spoken about the duration of contact time.
Mhm.
And that's a big ticket item to get to the level of research guided efficacy of 100 hours. And that's going to show up. I think one of the things for us to consider is, are there other ways for us to think about that 100 hours? Is it simply the 100 hours, or does that create opportunity for double the contact time in math and double the contact time in ELA? And if we look at the scores in terms of points of efficacy, you know, the 7s and 8s are a lot bigger than the 4s and 1s, right? On slide 11. And so is there, for example, a same investment level that's math focused that stretches from 14 days to 28 days, but over a shorter duration during the day, 2 hours a day instead of 4? I understand that won't be of equal cost given the fixed cost spread across the calendar. At the same time, I think it opens the conversation of two parts, which is, what are the points of efficacy? And could we get precise enough to say that from grade 1 to 2, math is worth spending money on, or some others? If I will be disappointed, but I will understand if the answer is probably not or no. At the same time, looking at it and saying, hey, the only way is double the price for some future estimate of efficacy. If there's a more precise strike that we can make, it might be warranted.
I just want to remind us that summer school is not the same as regular school. We don't have a truancy issue here. And when you start to extend, at least what I heard was summer camps, vacations, we are interrupting people's families' plans. We know that people have planned their vacations earlier. And so to extend it 2 hours, I know it's just an example, but for a longer period of time, my guess is attendance will go down or people will not choose it.
Mrs. McCabe, I'd be quite happy with the 4 hours a day of math.
And and part of that, to be clear, we'll have to own where we were in the timeline last spring. We didn't get these invitations out to parents until mid to late April, when some of those vacation, and this was right away in June. So some of that was more self-imposed, that, you know, moving forward, we could circumvent that with a better timeline. But, you know, for a lot of our families, they had less than 2 months to say, yeah, this is something I want to commit to.
I guess my gut feeling is I really liked how you approached who was going to be invited, but summer school, it doesn't have strong research back. But if there are strategies, if there are opportunities that we could see, and we've tried so many different ways, jumpstart before school starts, 2 weeks before school starts, let's grab those kids, let's get them. I don't know. I guess I'm struggling to spend a lot of time on this because I don't see it as being a strong enough investment. I do not want kids to come unprepared, you know, but
There's a lot of positive learnings, but not a lot of evidence of positive outcomes here. And so we as a district maybe get some learnings in terms of whether the program had efficacy, but unfortunately for us and these students, the evidence of efficacy is low or absent. In fact, let me rephrase, I'll be more direct. There is no evidence in this report of efficacy of summer school. And so I think in my commentary, it's about salvaging whether or not there would be some points of value. But I see it as well. There's a big price tag. There's a second big price tag on a page we have yet to get to, and no evidence of efficacy.
So just to kind of jump off what Mr. Lackner said, I think that if you did have something that extended out for a longer period of time, and there would probably, you're right, I'm sure there'd be lower enrollment. I think the people who would be enrolled would be the ones more serious about it. And so that would probably have an impact on outcomes. But again, cost benefit analysis, I'm not sure. I do want to point out that there was some clapping over there from a math teacher when you said you supported 4 hours of.
And I know we haven't got,
Students everywhere are upset with me now.
And I know there's a few more things to go here, but I think
I'm sorry, my battery has.
officially died. This is par for the course, par for the course. I want to acknowledge that we did not see that and we tried really hard and we sliced the data multiple ways to see like what could it be, what could it not be? And I think there might be a time and a place for us to come back and revisit this and think about it very intentionally and very focused when we have things in place and all the other pieces that go with it. But I just keep thinking about, we go back to the original slide when I started like 3 hours ago, right? We had that big slide of all the work that we're doing. And there's a lot of big, heavy leverage work in there that when those things and pieces are in place, this becomes easier for us to get very strategic and intentional about how do I build this focused here or focused there. But I feel like we might just be spinning our wheels.
As a result of the work we've done as a board with the ROI and all of that, and I've been very, it's really helped me and it's really changed my thinking about how to weigh things. And Mr. Lackner and I've had multiple conversations. This is one of those programs that we want to believe in, but the results aren't coming back. And I think we're all going to face programs that we want to keep. And if the results aren't there, then why are we doing the ROI and we want to be good stewards of money. We want to make sure every kid is successful and all of that. And this is one of those programs. It's hard to see that it isn't having the results.
Would you like me to proceed?
I don't, which is unusual. I would like to maybe get some feedback from the board. Does the board want us to gather more feedback, some of the questions that were asked, or leaning into Dr. Igo's suggestion is we would come back at another date and time a couple years down the road once we have even more of our work all in place and working down this road. Because I would hate to just belabor the point and we can continue talking, or you can give us that feedback.
Just before we do that, I mean, it is important to note we have 2 board members that are not here to look at the data, view the presentation. So I think it would be prudent that we speak to them as well and maybe brought up to speed regarding this data. Just a quick little point in response to you, Mrs. McCabe, is yes, I mean, I don't think this data is particularly encouraging for the program. It is a 1-year analysis. To Mr. Buxton's point, we invited them very late in the game. It looked like, I don't know exactly what the percentage was, but 283 invited, 165 attended, over 80% of the time. I mean, I think there's a number of variables, fast rollout, duration of the program. There's a lot of things that's pretty challenging for us to just nix this program. And again, with other board members not here in attendance to discuss this, I understand you're not looking for a vote. We're just looking for, consensus and a discussion here. But I think that those points are important, just as we consider the discussion.
That's just the one thing you had said is this is 1 year and it's in somewhat aberrant year, I think, for the rollout. So I don't really have an opinion one way or the other yet, but I'm really not ready to formulate one right now, but certainly don't know that I could do that on a single year's data when we've had other programs that have gone for much longer and we continue to view.
So what we can do is bring back a little bit more of the data that the board's requested. We'll add this as we gotta kind of time caps this one because our November it's huge. We are doing our common assessment data, and that is, for me, it is going to be a brand new opportunity for our board and our community and our staff to do that. And that's where I want the lion's share of that evening focused on. That would be my preferences if we're doing this. And I know if we're moving this forward, Dr. Igo needs to move that forward too.
So I just
apologize.
real quick on this. So just for Mr. Kosher and Mr. McNally, I am hearing, between the lines, right? Admin is kind of telling us, hey, we're not ready for this right now. I would rather ask admin to focus on the other things that we know, like especially the catalog renewal, like all the other things. I'd rather just take this off their plate and say, hey, guys, okay, let's not do this next year. Let's not worry about this in our budget. Let's come back to us when we think we know a little bit more. I am hearing that. I know, Christine, I know you're not directly saying it, but I mean, well, other than the final line of the memo, right?
And
But to the board at the table right now, that's what I'm hearing is like, hey, get this off our plate.
to that point, I wouldn't want us to do another aberrant year. So but some of the data, it sounds like some of it is just a punch of a couple of buttons to come up with some of these questions that we're asking. And if that's the case, we can look at it and see if there's any value in any subgroup or in some way. But like I say, I don't have a full opinion on it because I don't think I have enough information to have a full opinion on it.
I can add it to the regular board meeting. I do not want to add it to any of the L&T at November or December.
I think
So if
getting
the
us,
board's okay with that, where we can try to keep a condensed
and
aspect
getting us
of
the
it.
data ahead of time, we can take a look at it and we
Absolutely.
can walk in here with maybe a more informed opinion as well.
Yeah, we did jump the gun on the cost on the last page, and sorry for stealing the thunder on that. One thing might be valuable for us to look at. So we have a couple of options. One is we cease the program. The second would be that we perpetuate this program as designed past the launch year and gather an additional set of data, recognizing all the costs that go with it, or double the budget and try to hit the programmatic hours of contact that would be required according to research to have a higher impact. That might look attractive to the board if we knew that not only it eliminated the summer slide, but created positive momentum from spring to fall. We hadn't had that conversation, meaning, is there a point of efficacy at a certain price? And so
I mean, the reason we said it like that is the research doesn't show that you get you spring ahead. It really just shows that we limit the amount of regression, and really we limit the amount of regression typically for students that qualify for free and reduced lunch. It's not usually seen the research shows that over and over again.
Real quick, from a procedural perspective, is this an active vote? Would we be actively voting to discontinue the program? This was an experimental program. We didn't bring this up as an ongoing initiative. So when we have to actively vote to have that discussion, is this just based off of administration's recommendation and then the board reaches consensus? I think it's important that we
Yes,
make that decision.
that's how I would see this, is through the discussion. If the board wanted to continue it, we would reach that consensus. If the board wanted to pause it, or the other ideas behind that Mr. Lackner put, I think that's all through the consensus process. But again,
Budget wise, I think we did include some of this. We include some of this in the elementary budget.
We do. We did
We
put money
did.
aside for this.
this
But-
amount.
This amount, though.
Not even. Not even.
Okay.
Thank you.
We had to go in order to get it. We needed to go back and use
Right.
some of our carryover funds, but and our ESSER funds to get to that
So we can
200.
get
So
that
we
back.
don't
'Cause we
have
did- we
even
did-
that much in.
And those ESSER funds are not permanent. So
Correct. They are gone.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have our marching orders. Will be back at the November board meeting. We'll put this under discussion, but we will be seeking consensus from the board that evening. All right. Thank you, Mr. Buxton.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton. I think that brings us up to item 4, adjournment. But first, item 4A, future agenda items. And Dr. Gordon, you alluded to us having a jam-packed meeting for the next L&T next month. So Dr. Igo, if you would.
Yeah, so this is our first opportunity to bring back that end of the unit assessment data. So I'm excited to bring that through our new PLC process. We'll be talking, we're going to highlight grade 3, 5, 8, and 11, you'll see all the data, but we'll bring those to talk to the table to have a conversation about. What also we'll be bringing forward, as part of that high school experience, we talked about math acceleration, particularly at 3rd grade. So we will be bringing that forward as well of what that will look like and what are the costs associated with moving forward with that.
Any other future agenda items? board
What is the
members?
date of the next L&T?
And my quick witted answer is the 18th.
Thank you, Mr. Kuchen.
So that brings us to the final item, adjournment at 7:35 PM. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.